Welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones. I am a certified personal trainer, and I'm here to help you achieve your fitness goals without pain. In each episode, I'll share tips and strategies that will help you stay safe and pain-free while you're working out. I'll also interview experts in the field of fitness and pain management. So if you're ready to learn how to stay active and pain-free, then subscribe to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Jessie Duppler. She's a physical therapist and the owner of Chain Reaction Physical Therapy in Prescott, Arizona. Dr. Jessie is a specialist in treating cyclists and runners, working with everyone from professional athletes and ultra runners to dedicated weekend warriors. She draws her experience from her own competitive cyclist past. She brings a unique athletic perspective to her practice. She's passionate about finding and addressing the root cause of pain quickly and efficiently so her clients can get back to the road and trail stronger than ever. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jessie. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me.
So you deal, clearly, if you're dealing with cyclists and runners, you're dealing with endurance athletes.
You bet. Yeah, a lot of them.
So how does pain play a part in treating these athletes, and what do you do?
Yeah, so it's, especially with endurance athletes, right? It's a repetitive movement over and over again, whether you're cycling or whether you're running. And so it's really easy for, I know we've talked about, pain patterns and chronic pain and these patterns to get ingrained quite quickly with people. They go on a run and, if 2 miles, their hamstring's bothering them. The next time they go on a run, it's really easy for them, half mile in to feel their hamstring bothering them. So these repetitive movements, unfortunately, they're really good at creating that pain pathway that can just reinforce that pattern over and over again. So with my endurance athletes, it's really important to make sure that we're also giving the body, what I say is giving the body proof. So showing the body how it can move without pain so that they can then apply those principles for when they are running. Because it's really simple, especially for my cyclists and my ultra runners. They're both riding or running for hours on end. And so it's really easy if something is bothering you for that to be the focus every time you pedal or every time you take a step forward.
So how do you break that cycle? Because I think that most athletes kind of we get trigger happy. And so we feel that twinge, and then it starts to and then we go, oh God, like my training run is trash today because I felt that twinge in my hamstring or whatever. So how do you get people to break that cycle of thinking so that they can progress in their training?
You're right. And that's kind of the double-edged sword of being an athlete, right? They're really in tune with their bodies and sometimes almost to the point where it becomes a detriment for them. And so, like I said, it's all about giving the body proof. So typically with an evaluation, what we have to do is first figure out what's working. Typically what it is what's working too hard, what's not working hard enough, and how are we going to change those patterns. Pain typically comes originally from some sort of movement pattern that's no longer supporting us. So once we figure out that movement pattern and we change it, we then have to introduce a load tolerance to the tissue. So we figure out what tolerance that tissue can withstand. So we talk about, if we talk about running. Running, basically what I tell my patients is just a single leg stance over and over and over again. So if we can't run, let's take the velocity out of it. Can you hop? If you can't hop, let's take the movement out of it. Can you stand on one leg? Can you squat on one leg? And so basically finding regressions until we can find a spot where the person or the tissue goes, oh, okay, I'm okay with this. And the tissue and the body and the mind feels safe doing that movement. That's where we start. And that gives the body proof. I can do this thing use these muscles that I use running and it feels okay here. And then once we train the body to say, I feel okay here, we progress to the next step and say, okay, now can we go back to hopping? Does that feel okay? Great. Now can we go back to jogging? Does that feel okay? And so just making sure that we're showing the tissue and the brain, hey, this is a safe movement for you, and then just finding out how we can progress it from there. I think with athletes, it's a little hard, and I'm the same way because we're all or none, right? Like we can either run and feel great or we can't, or we can get on the bike and feel great or we can't. And so finding the middle grounds are really where we actually get the progress. And so a lot of it comes from just reteaching the tissue and the brain how to talk to each other. And sometimes we just have to take the degrees of difficulty out of it for the ability to do that.
That's amazing. I love that so much because of the fact that I don't know if anybody's ever explained that to me when I've gone for physical therapy and dealt with kind of that graduated stance in terms of getting back to whatever movement I was doing at the time that caused discomfort. So you are a physical therapist and you have your 4 stages of physical therapy that you use in your practice. How does that, can you tell us a little bit more, and how does that work in relation to sports performance?
Yeah. So when we talk about that kind of progression or that force tolerance, a lot of times we have to peel back a lot of layers. Sometimes people simplify pain by saying, hey, you just need to get stronger. And for some people, that's true. But for my population, since I work with athletes, that's typically not the case. We're typically already really strong. But what happens typically is our body will always choose the path of least resistance when it comes to movement. And so we'll figure out these movement patterns. And typically what it does is our body will use the bigger muscles that we already are really good at using, our quads, our hamstrings, our glutes, instead of modulating the smaller muscles. So the smaller hip rotators underneath the glutes, like the gemella and the obturator internus, all this stuff that our body will go, I don't think I need that because my glutes are super strong. So a lot of times what we have to do is we have to teach the body how to, for lack of a better term, isolate these movements. Now we can never actually isolate a muscle, but we can at least advantage some muscles over other muscles. And so the idea is to isolate the muscles that are not working quite as well and teach them how to work so that they're not constantly getting kind of undermined by the bigger muscles. Then we have to teach that step one is isolating some of this stuff. Step two is coordination. We need to coordinate how the smaller muscles and the bigger muscles move together so they can produce force. From there, we then have to strengthen into those patterns too. So like I talked about, when it comes to progression, we talk about coordinating. A lot of times in some instances, I'll use something like, a bridge for people to learn how to use their glutes and their gastroc and their hamstrings together. But then we have to stand you upright, right? And make sure that you can do that over and over again for cycling. And so strengthening into those patterns so the muscles are strong enough to remember that 50 miles into your ride is the third step. And then the fourth step is performance. So velocity, power, endurance, making sure you can do your 100-mile trail run or making sure that you can perform at the top of your class at your crit. So making sure that we have the ability to really perform using all of those steps as we build upon them.
That's cool. So, as you're going through your training and you're dealing with these athletes who probably are very much in touch with their bodies, how do you teach them about vocabulary and language and as they're going through? Because I know that some athletes will feel some negative feelings towards something or even say something negative like, "Oh, my knee doesn't like me today," or whatever it may be. So is that also a part of your program where you're really having athletes do like a deeper understanding of their perception of recovery? And how does that work?
Yeah. So I think the first step really is being really intentional with how I speak to people. Really making sure that when I first explain what's going on with them, that they don't walk away feeling like, oh, I did the things wrong and that's why I'm in pain. Or, I'm broken. I have to fix all these things. I try really hard not to use the word fix. A lot of times I talk about how we're going to change how you're moving. And a lot of times, yeah, people will get, especially athletes will get down on themselves because they've depended on their body and their body's done amazing things for them. And so that's typically what I remind them of when they're like, oh gosh, yeah, my knee really hurts. And, I used to be running marathons. And what I tell them is, okay, we talked about, why your knee's in pain. We've talked about the things that maybe aren't supporting you as well as they need you to. But look how awesome your body's done up to this point, getting you to this point. It's been doing it with strategies that may not be the most efficient for you. So think how awesome it's going to be once we teach your body these new strategies. It's done such a great job and it hasn't been able to do everything at full force yet. And so I think really making sure the lens is, hey, the body is awesome and robust. Let's make it better so you don't feel these things. I think is a really helpful way to convey the message of, hey, we know that as an athlete, you depend on this body. We know that pain makes us feel like we're less than. It makes us feel like we can't perform. But all it is telling us, hey, here's something we got to pay attention to now, and we're going to fix it now. Now I use the word fix. We're going to change it now so that we can make sure that none of this happen in the future.
So do you run into issues where I'm getting older and I used to, same thing, right? So I'm getting older. I used to be able to run a marathon in this amount of time, but now the time is longer, or I didn't have all these problems when I used to wake up in the morning and now everything hurts. Do you deal with
Yeah.
that?
And I think a lot of times some of the talks do have to revolve around, okay, so when we age, some things do change. And some of the things are not as, severe as we may think they are. So, a lot of people ask me about, my doctor told me it was bone on bone in my knees. I hear that all the time. And what I tell people is, if we look at imaging, 60% of people, if we think about the back even, 60% of people in their MRIs will have some sort of pathology and have no pain. Part of aging is having everything look different. I have a colleague who's a DO and he always tells his patients, if you look at a picture of yourself now versus 20 years from now, you have more wrinkles and gray hair, right? Your bones are also going to have wrinkles and gray hair. Things are also going to change on the inside too. It doesn't mean it's pathological. Same thing with, yeah, if we wake up stiff in the morning. You're right. As we get older, we desiccate, we dry out a little bit, and our body is really dependent upon fluid. And so it does sometimes take us a little bit longer to get going in the morning, feeling a little bit stiff. But the big thing is to make sure we're setting the stage by doing typically some sort of movement in the morning, something that feels good for us, because the body does need just a little bit more care as we get older. The other thing I tell people is we also get a little louder as we get older. People are like, oh, my knees pop now, or oh, my hip pops now. And I ask them, well, is it painful? Like, no, it just makes noise now. And, I tell people as we make more noise as we get older. Things just sound louder, and that's okay if there's not any pain involved with it. There's nothing wrong with it. And so, and especially too with aging when it comes to performance. So as far as, yeah, time slowing down for running or whatever it might be. And a lot of it has to come down with how we treat the body as we age. There's some research that shows that we can actually improve our times with running or our heart rate variability, whatever it might be, as we age, but it takes more work to do so. And so a lot of it, and what a lot of I focus on with my endurance athletes also is strength training too. So strength training actually becomes more and more important as we get older to maintain muscle mass, to maintain bone density, and to keep ourselves robust and resilient too. So a lot of times when people have these issues that they say, yeah, I just feel more stiff or whatever it is, a lot of time that portion of it can just come down to, hey, we may need to get you into some more strength training. So, because a lot of times too, right, we get stiff when we sit in one position too long. We know that any position is not great if we sit in it too long, no matter what it is. If we stand too long, if we sit in the perfect posture too long, whatever it is. So making sure that we're teaching the body how it has the support for us in whatever positions we need to be in. And a lot of times, like I said, that just comes down to making sure we have appropriate strength training along with the endurance we're doing.
So how important is it for cyclists to do strength training? Because of course the obvious would be, well, squatting or doing whatever so that my legs get stronger. But what about the rest of the body?
Super important. Yeah. And I have this discussion with my cyclists all the time. And this is actually why we talked about this earlier, but I created this strength program that I have. It's called the Strength Revolution, because the biggest problem I have with my cyclists and my runners too is that we all want to be on the bike. And so we don't want to spend our time strength training. But what we see is that one of the problems with cycling is technically a non-weight bearing sport. We don't get the same ground impact force through our skeleton like someone does with running. So just by the sheer ability for us to be able to load our skeleton, we need to be able to strength train just for bone density purposes. The other reason is as far as like upper body stuff goes, that's important because unfortunately, especially for mountain bikers, it's not really a question of when you're going to hit the ground, or if you're going to hit the ground, it's when you're going to hit the ground, unfortunately. And so we want to make sure that our upper body is strong enough, because I see a lot of broken collarbones and a lot of broken wrists from mountain bike crashes too. And so the more muscle mass you have on you and the stronger your bones are, the less likely you are to be out for 6 to 12 weeks after an actual fracture, as opposed to just bruising your shoulder instead. So it becomes incredibly important for that. And then for performance wise, it also becomes incredibly important too, as far as when we talk about power is basically force over time. So the more that you can generate power with the bike, the more it translates to generating power on the bike. And so the more you can practice that, i.e. under a barbell in the gym, the better it'll transfer to skills on the bike.
That's great. I know that for me, when I talk to runners, we really talk about core, just that core strength, that shoulders to kneecaps, making sure everything's there, because posture is everything. And when you're running with good posture, you're getting better breath and you're able to, it just helps, it assists your endurance for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's always a good thing. I mean, I'm a strong advocate for strength training just for the fact that
Yeah.
I think that if we become too isolated in our sport, one, you run the risk of those repetitive use injuries, and then your form gets sloppy as well. And just by having that ability to strength train and get everything strong, you're just going to enjoy your sport a little bit longer, as opposed to just doing all the things. And we've watched that evolution through all the sports. I mean, when you look at athletes 40 years ago, they were very thin, doing whatever. I mean, cyclists were probably half the size that they were. When you look at gymnasts, same thing. They were teeny tiny, not very muscular. Everybody was in that idea of, I just need to be good at my sport. And then they start getting hurt and realizing like, oh, well, if I have better foot strength or whatever, when I'm tumbling as a gymnast and land, I'm probably going to land a lot better, especially if things know how to move, as opposed to try to stick a landing without too much muscular strength and blowing out my ankle or my knee or whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, specificity in sport is important, but nothing in the body works in a silo. And so if we think about, yeah, I'm just going to train the muscles that I need for sprinting, or just the muscles that I need for running, or yeah, gymnastics is a great example of that. And we don't step back and look at a wider lens and say, oh gosh, every muscle in the body works when we do anything. So we better make sure they're all strong. So I think you're right that the evolution has been good and that people have said, oh, wait a second, we need to make sure we are strong humans, not just strong athletes in our sport.
Right. Well, and we're also seeing just I was watching the NFL draft and
Mhm.
you know how basically they, give kind of a tail of the tape of the player. Oh, he's 6'3", this, and you see all these but you also see little guys where before football had a very idea of what you needed to be a football player. And now you're seeing these 5'8" guys, but it's kind of insane because they're 5'8" and they're weighing 215 pounds.
For sure.
And, and that's the downside of something like football where there is that contact. And so now everybody's bigger and stronger. So if I'm bigger and stronger as a tennis player, that's great. I have better endurance and I'll be able to play longer. All the things that are great going along with having strength and endurance in a singular sport. But when you're playing a competitive sport, that means that people are bigger and stronger running at me while I'm running at them.
For
So
sure, yeah.
yeah, so we have those so there's different types of injuries that you're dealing with as opposed to somebody who's running or cycling.
For sure,
So,
yeah.
what is I because I always have this question, what is the easiest area to deal with in terms of rehabilitation? What is the easiest thing that could possibly happen to somebody?
Ooh, great question. I would say I got 2. Can I split it? Can I split the difference? I would say both back pain and knee pains. Back pain and knee pain are, and what I tell people a lot of times is, pain is a symptom, not a cause. So knee pain often originates, what I say also is the knee is the victim of the hip and the foot. So the knee oftentimes absorbs force when something isn't working above or below it. And so, zooming back again and looking at what's going on at the hip, does the hip have enough stability? Is the hip able to actually tolerate force? Does the foot actually have the ability to force absorb, and does it have the ability shock absorb? That's what I'm looking for. And if those two things aren't happening, a lot of times the knee is where we start to see the problem. So a lot of times, if we just look at the mechanics above and below with the knee, especially, we can really clean that up pretty quickly. And that's regardless of what people's, again, x-ray looks like, bone on bone, blah, blah, blah. That's typically a fun one to do because we talk to people who are like, oh yeah, my doc told me I could never run again, and now they're hiking the Grand Canyon and doing whatever. And then similarly, back pain's a lot of the same way for a lot of people too. The back, we use it for a ton of stuff, and sometimes it just gets used too much. And so teaching the body how to use or generate force really from the ground up instead of from the back down can typically really help, especially with a lot of my athletes, a lot of my cyclists, my runners, because they're performing or running at such a high level, and especially in endurance, 50, 100-mile races, their legs get tired. And so they end up using their back more and more. So being able to, again, change the movement pattern oftentimes changes a lot of the pain pattern too. So both those things are really fun to fix. And it's, a lot of different things will happen as to why someone has, and you know this, right? Why someone has back pain. But if we can fix, geez, now I'm using fix all the time all of a sudden on this thing. If we can change the movement pattern, we can change a lot of the back pain people are experiencing.
Okay, so now the flip side, what is the hardest injury to kinda deal with?
I don't know about hardest, but I would say one of the toughest mentally is coming back from an ACL repair. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, to be totally honest with you. That's a really tough one to come back from because it's a really long recovery. It takes a lot of tenacity, and there's just a lot of phases of it too. And there's always a point too where people get and they feel pretty good, and then we really have to worry about the risk of re-injury because the graft itself is not as strong as we would like it to be, even though the patient is feeling good. And especially again with my athletes, they want to get back to the stuff they're doing. And so it's both a lot of really hard work and also a lot of really hard self control for a lot of athletes too. So I think it's just a really tough one to come back from, but really rewarding when you do put all the work in, even though it's just a really long.
Well, and it's nuts because I remember when I was playing in college, if you tore your ACL, you were kinda done.
Yeah.
You were looking at least a year of recovery and, I don't even know how long it was you were in a mobilizer for 12, 13 weeks, whatever, that kinda stuff, and there wasn't thank God we've evolved, but there wasn't the technology to deal with it. And now you're watching these athletes, and the same thing with Tommy John surgery, doing that UCL stuff and
Mhm.
whatever, and those repairs. It's kind of crazy because before you're all, oh, they're done. And now you're seeing people come back in 6 months after that injury. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, and I will say the professional athletes, they definitely have, kind of the, magic of everything on their side. So they're over there getting as much PRP as possible and stem cells and everything else too. That's not necessarily always available to all of us, but it is impressive the difference that we can see at least on the high level and the people returning to sport at that high level. And you're right, it's not the death sentence it once was, and it's not yeah, exactly. You're totally out of everything for 12 weeks before we can even take you out of the immobilizer. So we have seen a transition of at least getting people mobile as soon as possible, getting that tissue tolerance and load up as soon as possible. I think, yeah, the professional athletes, I think they set the paradigm a little too high for when everyone else kind of goes into it as the common man. But it's definitely, we've seen some significant advances in how we treat ACLs and the ability to get people back.
That's great. So, do you have what's a good success story for you in terms of like, damn, that's pretty good. Glad I was a part of that.
Yeah, man, I've got a couple. Let's see, who do we want to talk about? I'll talk about one of my gals. She was an ultra runner, and she was working on or had been having hamstring pain for a really long time. And she's been going to a PT up in Flagstaff. I'm about an hour and a half southwest of Flagstaff, and just not really seeing any changes, not really seeing any changes. And they kept just telling her, it's your hamstring, it's your hamstring. And so came to me, and she wasn't able to run, and she had this 100-mile race coming up and was getting starting to get really worried. And so came to me. And one of the things in my practice, we really make sure that we look at all the systems, right? I mean, you talk about chronic pain and how important the brain is and how it's never just musculoskeletal. And so we just made sure we looked at, nervous system, sciatic nerve, stress release, all that kind of stuff. And so with targeting the nervous system, targeting actual neural tension. We were able to go back to doing, she had a 100-mile race, and then she paced someone, I think it's like a 250-mile race in Tahoe or something. My ultra runners are crazy. And yeah, she did that, felt great. So it's really cool to see, especially, my crazy ultra runners, I love them. And then they go and do these nutty things. And it's really fun to see that they're able to get out there and really enjoy what they do again, even if I wouldn't necessarily want to be alongside them for a long time.
Well, I don't even really like I'll admit it now, I don't like running at all, and the idea of being out there and running for 100 miles is just, the insanity, and I don't even understand how people but I think that there's a euphoria about it as well, right? And you
Oh,
go through
yeah.
all I feel like you go through all the stages of grief, like, as you're running, right? You have this denial, like, "This is
Totally.
great, I'm so happy I'm here," and then they kind of fall apart, and then you're crying, and then by
Yep.
the time you're done, you're like, "Yeah, I did it."
Yeah. You get to acceptance. You still got 50 miles to go. But yeah, my ultra runners are awesome. It's a really cool, in Prescott's a really cool community too. They've got a really tight knit community. They really help each other out. So it's neat to see, even if I wouldn't be able to be out there with them the whole time.
Yeah. Well, you're supporting them in different ways. So
Exactly.
I wanted to talk a little bit about so you have this Strength Revolution training that you have. What was the reasoning behind it and how does it help people?
Yeah, so it was really designed to make sure I could be super efficient and super effective for my cyclists to get in and out of the gym. So I'm going to admit to you, I actually hate strength training. Do not like it. I'm an endurance gal. I would much rather run and ride. I know, I'm sorry to say it, but I religiously do it 3 times a week, and that is because I understand the importance of it. Not only from yeah, right. And this is the issue I have, not issue, but the conversation I have with a lot of my cyclists and a lot of my runners, because we'd rather be out doing the thing we love. We don't want to be in the gym. But as we get older, especially, once we hit our 30s and above, being in the gym is what allows us to keep doing the thing we love. And so it becomes incredibly important just from a injury prevention standpoint, from a longevity standpoint, and then from a performance standpoint for my higher level athletes. And so I created this program that really makes sure that you get everything you need in the gym and then get out of the gym. So the programs are 25 to 40 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, really making sure it targets the muscles for my endurance athletes. I originally created it just for my cyclists, but I've got a ton of runners that are doing it too and absolutely love it. So turns out it's for any endurance athlete that hates the gym but knows they need to go to the gym. So it's been really well received. I'm really happy with it. So it's been a really nice addition to help people get in that strength training so that they can stay on the trail and on the road.
I love it. So, Dr. Jesse, is there anything you'd like to share? Anything we haven't covered?
No, I don't think so. I think like I really like your podcast and just talking about, I see pain every day, right? Like that's why people come to PT. And it's so important to look at it not just from a musculoskeletal lens. So making sure we understand that a lot goes on the brain to process that. And yes, we can change those pain sensations by changing how we move, even if, you've talked in your past too about how like the tissue might even not be damaged in that part anymore. But the fact that we can teach the body how to move fearlessly again is super important, and really making sure we give people the confidence back to do that. So I think it's really important to just make sure that people understand that we get that it's really hard to come back from pain, and it's not always just training a muscle. It's all about teaching the body to feel safe with movement again.
For sure. And I've said it before. I have torn cartilage in my knee. I have
Mhm.
I don't know what's left of my rotator cuff from years of playing softball, but I still do all the things. Like I can still do shoulder presses and everything, even though those things are gone, and I don't experience any discomfort in both those areas. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it's just, but there's a process to it, and that's the thing. We're
Right.
not discounting pain is real.
For
Everybody's
sure.
pain is real.
100%.
Your brain is
Yep.
interpreting something and it's warning you. It's
Right.
how you're able to kind of calm your nervous system down so that you can get through it is
Totally.
the
Yeah.
biggest piece.
I
Well,
know people say, well, like pain's all in your head. Well, of course, where else is it going to get processed? Like that's where it has to get. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It means the brain's involved in what we're doing. So
right.
it's,
But
it
not
has to be
everybody
involved.
says that, and that's the hard thing.
Yeah.
Like I know because basically you're saying like I'm crazy.
Yeah, right,
That's
exactly. And
Yeah,
that's a
and people
terrible
are
thing to say.
getting
I know it's a
better
terrible way to
now
say
they
it.
understand it,
Yeah.
and you have to say, like, "It's in your brain." It's not, it's not you're not making it up. We understand it's
Right.
there. It's a body's natural defense system, right? It's your smoke alarm. It's
Hmm.
just whether or not there's actual fire, but your body thinks there's a fire, so now you have to kind of
Right.
backtrack and be an investigator and figure out what's causing those signals to be triggered.
Exactly. Yeah. I tell people it's a lot like, software and hardware for a computer, right? Like if your screen goes blank, you don't know if there's some sort of virus going on, but you know that your screen's blank. And so even if we can't see whatever virus got downloaded or whatever it is, we know that there's something going on. And so sometimes we just have to rewire or get rid of the virus, even though that doesn't look like where you thought your screen was going blank from. So it's all about just finding the wiring and finding the right stuff.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And how do we get in touch with you?
So you can find me on Instagram. I'm really active on there. I do a lot of information about just PT, your body moving, running, cycling, and that's just Chain Reaction PT. And then my website is chainreactionpt.com as well. That's where I have my Strength Revolution. I have a bike fit program there, and I have a bunch of blogs on cycling and running, and a lot of things on bike fits too. So for people that have discomfort on their bike when they're riding, I've got a ton of information on there for that.
And if you're a cyclist, bike fit is that's our nemesis.
Yeah.
So weird
Yeah.
how it is, but it is. So you
Yeah,
gotta
it's hard.
if you can get it dialed in, you'll be golden.
Yep, exactly. And I actually have a checklist on my website too, like a free downloadable checklist for like the 5 things I look at a bike fit. So if people are like struggling for trying to figure out how to feel better on their bike, those are the 5 things I start with when I'm doing bike fits for people.
Great. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dana. Great talking to you.
You too.